invite to this event, to which I wish a warm welcome to everybody of you. My name is Michael Winterhuber. I'm head of the Bavarian representation here. Welcome together with Florian Schreier, who is our media expert here. When we sent out the invitation, I was sure that everybody of you would know what EMFA and AVMSD is. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. So you know more about it than I do, actually. But it is, of course, these are acronyms that stand for a policy, and that stand for the need to balance things in society, things economically, and things in the media world. And I'm very happy to welcome you to this conference, which is actually annually recurring, if I may say so. And I'm very happy that the team from the observatory is here, and that we have the occasion to discuss the future of media and their role in society and economy here in the Bavarian representation. And we're very proud of this, actually, because Bavaria, of course, sees itself as a beacon of liberty in media and freedom, economically, societally, and also on a journalism level. And so this is also why we have fought against the EMFA, the European Media Freedom Act, because we don't think it brings freedom. We're suspicious that it would curtail freedom, especially in our German system. As you know, we have national regulators that work very well, and we don't need another European regulator. Now that we have it, of course, the discussion is not over, and I understand that most of the provisions are going to take effect only as of next year. And today is the occasion to discuss what it means, I believe, and we're still fighting to keep the margin open for the member states, different member states' approaches. The rules on prominence and protection of minors specifically, they must in particular take into account the member states' approaches, traditions and specificities. And everything must be adapted to the specificities of the media sector. And I would say media regulation should stay national, in our case also regional in Germany. This is the most important thing that we have to say. I would say overall politically we are witnessing an interesting time where media play an important role in society and politics. Should I be the first person here to mention the United States and the new president? Maybe somebody else will. No, you say no, we shouldn't talk about it. No, but certainly we do have a situation that is very interesting. But I would say in the current political situation that we have in Europe, it's also interesting where we're going, because we have a new commission as of this week who is in place, and who will also be a new partner for us, I think, in this case. With new commissioners being responsible also for media and economic affairs. But on the member state level, we have, I wouldn't say a kind of a void, we have an interesting situation in France right now, in Paris, where the stability of the government is at stake. And we have an interesting situation in Germany. In Germany, everything always runs smoothly, don't worry. And maybe without a functioning government, even better. But of course, we're not in the strongest position in Europe politically, and we have elections coming up on the 23rd of February, probably. And so there will be another round of political decisive decisions. But it's very clear that, especially in campaigns, and everybody who has been watching the German media over the last few days, it's a very interesting battle that is going on about the interpretation, what has happened, what has led to the breakup of the German coalition. And this is a very interesting thing that you can see, and I want to say this when I speak about media freedom. And I read a very interesting comment this morning about this. We do not have, as we used to have in Germany, a state-driven and government-driven media scene. Very often this is a misunderstanding here, that people speak of Staatsfunk, so that we have a state broadcasters, and this is the government, and they're doing this. This is not happening. This was the case in Germany, in the Deutsche Reich, when the first time this radio was available and the state could control it. And it was the case in the so-called German Democratic Republic, where the state could also control it. The state doesn't control it. But what's interesting and what's for media freedom even more, maybe even more difficult also to regulate is that you have now forming groups of like-minded journalists in media that are, I would say this is something that just happens because journalists is a free profession. You go there and you share your views with others, and groups of journalists find themselves, and in Germany, and maybe it's also the case everywhere else, especially in the public broadcasting, you have the impression that the journalists who run it, they're not influenced by the state, but they are come out, they represent a particular group of society with a particular thinking, where more and more people have the impression it doesn't reflect the entirety of that what society thinks. So I would maybe also, I don't know, you have other things to discuss, and I'm reflecting very much of this, how is journalistic self-control working, and also opening up minds for society. And this is where I come back to the United States, and also the lenses. You know, we have all watched the United States election through different lenses, and we have most of us have been surprised of the outcome. And we should also think about why were we surprised about so many things? Because maybe many of the journalists that reported about the United States had a bias of wishful thinking. So Germans were thinking that Kamala Harris would win this for sure, because the wishful thinking in Germany was so strong that the reporting was all going in that direction. And so this is something that I'm exaggerating here. I see exaggerating a little bit, but I would say there are fields here that cannot be easily regulated, and but also that we have to take into account when we think about responsibility and future of the media in our political atmosphere. So I wish you very welcome again at the Bavarian representation. Enjoy your afternoon. It will be interesting. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon to everybody. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Regulator, for this introduction, and also for once more, as you said, wonderful routine and tradition invite us to be here and to allow us to, well, have this exchange and this meeting with you also before the actual event. We have a clear division of labor between Mr. Hinterdope and myself. He raised some political aspects. At the observatory, this is exactly what we will not do, so do not expect us. I don't think that this is, well, either side is extremely interesting and valuable. I want to also be brief and just remind you why we are here. Now, one thing I already mentioned. We feel strongly that we have to come to Brussels, where a lot of the thinking that frames, in the end, the audiovisual sector is done. A lot of decisions that frame the audiovisual sector are taken. So that is the first reason, and we were really happy to already have the chance to chat with so many of you before the event. So that's reason number one. That was not meant to be. The second reason why we come is usually because we have something to report. And in this case, we have a very recent publication on the internet since this morning. It's the European Media Freedom Act Unfolded. You can download it for free, and I hope you all do that. And of course, we have the author of this interesting report with us, our keynote speaker, Mark Cole, who is with the professor at the University of Luxembourg, but also we have a strong link with him to our partner institution, the European Media Law Institute in Saarbrücken. And that's reason number two. So here is something that we can share. Reason number three is, I think there's something we have to talk about. You have to talk about, and we can help this discussion by moderating it. This will be the task of my colleague Maya Capello, who heads the Department for Legal Information at the Observatory. I think you all know her well, who will guide you through today. And maybe we can then all discover what at least keeps my mind busy, and I think you should raise hand if it does not also keep your mind busy. And that is, what is it really all about, that European Media Freedom Act? So how really does it play out? And in particular, how does it play out with regard to the other very centerpiece of audiovisual media legislation, the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. So that's going to be a very strong angle, but curious as we are, we also wonder, will those two instruments in tandem, or however, will they really serve the purposes that they set out to serve? So I think that's a little bit the bottom line of what you can expect in the discussion, and I think you have now really heard enough from me, and I would like the panelists to maybe already come and take the stage, while also our keynote speaker can come up and introduce to you the European Media Freedom Act and a little bit more than that.
Very much. Very much. You know, when I arrived at the University of Luxembourg and said I teach media law, from that day onwards I always had to take care of technical issues like this, and I said just talking about media law doesn't mean one is actually competent in using all of these devices and media things. But anyway, I'm supposed to be the expert of that. Now we jump in. So I'm going to unpack the European Media Freedom Act together with you in less than 10 minutes. And therefore we took a slightly different approach. Here we go. So, firstly, I'm going to ask myself, what is EMFA? And this is the slightly different approach we took, because if you unpack something, it obviously has to be a parcel. It's got nothing to do with pre-Christmas period, everyone is thinking about parcels, but it's a box, EMFA. Its code number, as you can see, product number is 2024-1083. It's been shipped by the European Union. It's delivered to the member states, but not only them, some others also. It was sent on the 7th of May of this year. Real delivery is not expected until February, actually partly also in May 25, and some bits of it will only be delivered on the 8th of May 2027. So there's going to be some delays because we need assistance by the receivers of this parcel. And in addition, some articles will be shipped a little bit earlier. They will arrive in a separate package. For example, Article 3 already has reached the market. And the addresses, well, European Union, basically everywhere in the European Union. So no special customs requirement, we have a single market, except maybe for Article 17, because that does have a global or at least non-EU reach with the question of content coming in from the outside of the European Union. And maybe as additional information for the shipping, it's a directly binding regulation, so there's a stable load. We don't need a fragile sign on it because we don't have to rely on the member states, at least seemingly, on what they're going to do with it. And what about the value of the goods that are inside there? Well, obviously they are priceless, okay? Media freedom and pluralism of the media. And you have to add maybe VAT to the priceless tag because there is going to be member states involvement. Now we want to know a little bit more detail what is in that packet when we unpack it. So we opened it, the box, and we found inside 4 different little boxes. One of them, rights of recipients or rights of the users. One of them, rights of the media service providers. One of them, duties of the media service providers. And a final box on the internal media market toolkit. And every good parcel, which is made up of different elements, also needs an instruction manual, obviously. And if you look carefully, once it appears again on screen, you will see it looks a little bit odd, doesn't it? The writing. For the first time, and that's what I meant when I said I did it a little bit different, for the first time I actually used an AI tool to create part of a presentation. I don't usually do that because I try to show my students you can live without AI and still do good presentations. But I did it and I wanted to see what comes out of it. I can't tell you how many attempts we needed to get a barcode 2024-1083. It's unbelievable because it's the most simple task, create a parcel with a barcode with this number, that was already many attempts, and the instruction manual, you can't get it in clear writing. But then I thought, actually that's quite nice, because maybe the instruction manual is not so clear. And I will tell you why. Or copyright. Or copyright for that matter. What is in these little boxes more in detail. And again, I only have a few minutes, so don't expect me to actually delve into everything in detail, but each of these little boxes, if you open them up, have additional content, obviously. For example, when it comes to the rights of recipients or rights of users, we find twice that little box. One is access to plural and independent media content as a right, but actually not a subjective right. It's something that has to be awarded to the individuals, but there is no guarantee that the shipper, so the European Union, can award that directly to the individual recipients. And once again, don't forget, that has already been delivered beginning of November of this year. And then we have got 2024-1083-A21, A21 being Article 21, obviously, customization of media offerings, the right of individuals to change the settings on their devices. Actually, who is that addressed to? Well, we need a delivery note that goes to the manufacturers, developers, and importers of devices and user interfaces that are covered. Remember, I said there is more than just the member states that are addressees. What about the second box? Rights of media service providers. We can find that 3 times in the big parcel. We have Article 4 and also Article 21 that deals with the protection of editorial independence. That means media service providers that qualify under the definition of MSPs, according to the EMFA, have the right to work with a guarantee of their editorial independence. After what we just heard in introductory words, that may be one of the most important elements for the future, although it's written in the law, and we have to see how that transports into practice. The next one is also Article 4, but the following paragraphs is about the protection of journalistic sources. So basically the work of these independent, independently published media content. And then we have something that I have tagged as media privilege, so the idea that media, if they qualify under this regulation, have a specific protection vis-à-vis platforms, something that didn't find its entry into the Digital Services Act, but is there now in the EMFA. Third little box, duties of media service providers. A few less, but also two main ones. One of them is to provide transparency about their ownership, so the media service providers are obliged now to provide more details about media ownership, and internally, in order to benefit from the external guarantee of editorial independence, they have to guarantee that internally in the publishing houses, in the media service houses, there is some form of independence of the decision of the journalists, of the leading journalists, on when it comes what they want to publish. The last box, what we call the internal media market toolkit, remember, single market. There we have different variants of the same topic. We've got number 1, an assessment of media market concentrations. This is a first edition, where we now see that media concentration in the markets has to be assessed in a different way than only through market power, cartel lenses. Number 2, we have some basic rules for audience measurement, especially now that it's become more complex, not only television but online. That's also a first edition. And the third first edition in the new legislative act is basic rules on the allocation of state advertising, so also a question of sustainability and financing. And now comes this instruction manual, which you couldn't read so carefully. The instruction manual in my reading of the parcel is the institutional framework, the institutional setup, which includes national regulatory authorities, a newly created board for media services, and the European Commission. And in between those institutions, there is cooperation mechanisms. They are not completely new. It's a kind of an updated version 2.0 or the second edition of a model that was developed under a different parcel, which you also have to take into consideration, the AVMSD parcel, namely the Memorandum of Understanding that the ERGA group had developed under the AVMSD. That's very fast, very condensed, and I can imagine that you have many questions. Hopefully, more of the unpacking is in this publication, which, as Susanne has indicated, is online since today, on the website of the EAO in English, French, and German. At least, I don't know whether both versions are there already. Yes, all 3 of them are there. So you can read more in detail on roughly 50 pages. We've given you an overview at the end. What are the main articles and the recitals to it? Hopefully, this instruction manual is a little bit clearer than the one that has been added to the parcel. I will only show you, I'm not going to go into the detail, one example is we have tried to graphically, by figures, to show you a little bit bit the functioning of some of these articles. For example, you will find this here in the publication about the institutional setup, because alone those articles 7 to 13 of the EMFA, the instruction manual, are quite complex. The cooperation mechanism between the board, which is the assembly of the national regulatory authorities, and the commission, who consults whom for which elements, who is allowed to give expertise, and what role the contact committee, which has been installed under the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, plays. So this just to give you an appetizer if you want to dig deeper with the report. And that leads me to the second reason and the final slide, why I decided to go for AI in creation of these elements. You probably all know that if you use AI to create pictures of, for example, people, you will relatively easily still spot it because maybe the thumb is like this or something is odd. Can you see what's odd about the puzzle? Okay, there's three different pieces and somehow they don't go together completely, right? And that is exactly the point I want to make, and that's more or less the hangover for the discussion. What questions do we have when it comes to consistency and coherence with other related legal acts? EMFA and AVMSD being the obvious one. EMFA changes, amends the AVMSD, introduces a new board, replaces the area. So it's only very limited, the changes. And that's why the AVMSD cannot be in the list of all the legislative acts which remain unaffected by the EMFA. So the big question is it maybe affected beyond just the institutional change? The country of origin principle was not touched, even though there were quite a few discussions beforehand whether it can stay exactly in the same way that it exists. If you look at the ownership transparency, there is already a rule that member states can introduce that on national level in the AVMSD, and now we have an obligation under the EMFA, so how do they play together? Some potential further harmonization will take place because the European Commission has been given guideline possibilities under the EMFA, far beyond the two possibilities that it had under the AVMSD. And finally, if you look at, for example, Article 17, which is the reaction to foreign interference, so content coming in across the borders, there the EMFA basically suggests that there has to be a better coordination between the national regulatory authorities. In the AVMSD, we have very detailed rules on cooperation in 2 or 3 very limited cases of derogation and circumvention. And now we've got this very general Article 17 that says in cases like, for example, the Russian disinformation campaigns, there should be a coordinated effort to react to it. But what exactly it means, we don't know. So big question marks. What about EMFA and DSA? Well, EMFA actually does not affect the DSA explicitly, according to the rules, but in reality, it does address some of the same players, for example, very large online platforms, and more specifically, VSP, video sharing platform providers. Article 18 says that the DSA rules should have priority, but at the same time, there has to be a structured dialogue with the very large online platforms when it comes to the media privilege. And in actual practice, at least the way I see it, the coordination will be one of the main things, because there are no specific rules on the coordination between the Board for Digital Services, under the DSA, and the European Board for Media Services under the EMFA. And then finally, what about the AVMSD and the DSA? Although that is not the core topic of today, but you have to think it as well. The DSA, according to its list, remains without prejudice to the AVMSD. But again, partly the same actors are addressed: video sharing platform providers, distributors of audiovisual content. The DSA revolves around illegal content, but doesn't define illegal content. But the reason for illegality of content can stem from EU law. For example, the AVMSD Article 6. So you can see what I'm trying to say as the final message is, we have this really valuable box now, but we will have to see how we can get it together into one puzzle piece. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Marco for this extremely interesting, witty, brilliant introduction to this, shall we call it mosaic? Is that a kind way of presenting the complexity? I will I'm a philosophy lover myself, and I trust there are many of you also in the room. Heraclitus was one of my favorites, and he used to say that there is nothing permanent except change. Pantare was what he was saying, everything flows. And I think this applies very well also to the regulatory framework. There is a cycle where things change. We have to get updates with the market, with the changes, with technology. We have here today a distinguished panelists from different sides of the value chain, from public broadcasting, video on demand, commercial broadcasters and video on demand services, academia, because you count in also as academia, here not only as keynote speaker, European Commission, civil society, and video sharing platforms with Meta. So we have really tried to gather together the different stakeholders here. So there is a lot on your agenda, I think, Anna, now. I mean, there has also been, this file, you've been working on it extensively, and you are chairing the audiovisual and media services policy unit at the DG Connect, who is in charge. So we heard a lot, many parcels, many delivery dates. What is the priority of the Commission?
Thank you, Maya, and good morning, everyone. Thanks to the Observatory for having me and having organized this at such an important moment in time with the new Commission just starting. And also thanks to Mark for finally, if I understood, maybe having made it to the camp of EMFA's friends, if I understood you correctly. So Mark knows what I mean, but I really appreciate this introduction. So yes, coming to your question, Maya, a lot on our plate. You have seen probably that media topics figure quite prominently in the political guidelines, but also in, you have heard probably in the process of the hearings, the responsible political masters, giving already some first answers, to important questions. And there's no doubt that EMFA would be, and its actual implementation would be very high on the agenda of this new college, with the executive vice president, as you will have seen, Virkunen, responsible for the overall media policy, and also committed, as she stated very clearly in her hearing, to the implementation of the European Media Freedom Act, and Commissioner McGrath specifically focusing on EMFA implementation. You will have seen some teasers, precisely, so my task is eased by that. But if I were, from the working level perspective, to summarize our priorities in EMFA implementation, I think I would say there are four. The first will obviously be to make sure that this package arrives well, on the market and undamaged, in the sense that it starts working, so its contents are supposed to work, on the market. And for most of the provisions, it will be indeed August next year. So we will be very busy now with the member states. We have started this process already yesterday with a dedicated meeting with the member state authorities to discuss what they will do in practice in this coming roughly 6 months to align the legal frameworks to EMFA's principles. Because Mark, of course, said it is a regulation and it is directly applicable, but there will be a lot for the member states in terms of aligning, their rules, their frameworks to its principles. So this sort of readiness check, that we are now starting with the member states will be certainly a priority for this new college. Then, of course, there are some deliverables that, also the Commission will be busy preparing. In terms of guidelines that Mark also mentioned, we will certainly prioritize those on Article 18 that you also described. So the safeguards that were put in place for reputable media content on very large online platforms. We think that is very important for media integrity and media independence, and we will try to do our best to have these guidelines in place by August, or at least very close, coinciding with the actual application of the new rules. And we are curious also to the views of the concerned players, what they will do in the meantime, and we will of course try to assist and involve everybody in the drafting, the preparation of the drafting of the guidelines. Third, you also hinted at that distribution of media content is becoming, increasingly, how should I put it, even more disintermediated than it used to be in the past. Hence, the importance of the different rules, that we are putting in place to help media sustainability. Customization is one of the rules in EMFA with a long date, but incredible importance in terms of what it will, make in terms of the difference for us users of connected TVs and other interfaces. Prominence, this was also mentioned, the point of contact between AVMSD and EMFA. Again, very important for media findability, and last but not least, also audience measurement, quite significant for the sustainability of media in terms of advertising revenue. So all these issues are very technical, seem very technical, but they're extremely important, for media sustainability and viability, and we will want to discuss them with the industry, with member states representatives, with media regulators in a dedicated forum. Probably it will take place, under the aegis of the European News Media Forum that we have been organizing successfully on different topics in the past affecting the news media. So that is another possibility that next year we will try to gather all the stakeholders in this forum to discuss these issues. And last but not least, and I know that on this you will have a dedicated chat with the current chair of ERGA, Giacomo La Sorella, we will also be very busy together with ERGA to make sure that the transition from ERGA to the new European Board for Media Services is as smooth as possible.
Thank you very much. That's a lot on the plate. I think that we perceive a bit the heaviness of the workload of your team, and I trust that with the participation of the stakeholders we will reach the 8th of August of 25 in a good way. This was a great introduction to this first round of the panel. We will focus in the first round on the challenges of safeguarding media pluralism and independence of media service providers. We will then have a chat with the regulators before we round to the second session, which will focus on the fairness for market players and increased protection of the viewers, which will be introduced by the market presentation by my colleague Gilles Fontaine. So this is on the menu for today. And to kick off this first round of discussion, I would like to start with you, Mark. Mark Dempsey is from Article 19. It's an organization that defends freedom of expression. It's particularly committed to defense of media freedom. So I would like to profit from you. You are a senior advocacy officer at the Law and Policy team, so I guess you studied very well this file. So what can you report on the level of protection of media freedom and editorial integrity in Europe? How is the health conditions of Europe today with regard to this?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here. It's certainly nice to be one of very few civil society organisations in the room. I see some familiar faces, but way more unfamiliar faces, so it's a slightly different audience that we're used to talking to. So I think I have to be probably quite persuasive in my comments. So the media freedom and editorial integrity outlook does not look great, frankly. So I want to give a little overview of taking firstly the Eastern Partnership countries, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine. All are dealing with unique challenges vis-à-vis media freedom and editorial integrity. There are a number of cross-cutting issues. So there has been significant rise in disinformation campaigns that are undermining trust in the media across Eastern Europe. Slaps, strategic lawsuits and legal harassment in general are increasingly being used to silence journalists and drain their resources. The increased monitoring of online activists puts journalists at risk and hampers free expression. And finally, independent media outlets are struggling financially, making them vulnerable to political and commercial pressures. So in an EU context, the problems are similar, in particular for Italy, Greece, Croatia and Slovakia. On Poland, arguably there has been a slight improvement in the media freedom situation with the change of government, but market concentration remains untouched. Italy, unsurprisingly, under Meloni, has seen a rapid deterioration. Just to add, and I want to put this in there slightly provocatively, that this didn't stop the Atlantic Council, rather puzzlingly, to put it mildly, awarding her a Global Citizen Award. But that is by the by in terms of what I want to say here today, but nevertheless, some of you will have seen a statement that we put online and signed with a number of civil society organisations regarding questioning the award and hopefully, well, at least hopefully was the intention at the time, but ultimately asking the Atlantic Council to retract it, which they ultimately didn't. But back to what's actually happening in Italy. The Centre for Media Pluralism and Media Freedom's Media Pluralism Monitor at the EUI included Italy in a list of countries where the independence of public service media is most threatened. That is to say, the highest risk level. As regards Greece, a mission report from the Media Freedom Rapid Response Coalition notes that the country is ranked as the worst for media freedom in the EU in the World Press Freedom Index, and that following the 2023 election victory of New Democracy, states that media freedom in Greece, and I quote, has undergone a sustained decline in the last few years amidst the broad daylight murder of a journalist, a sprawling surveillance and spyware scandal, and numerous vexatious lawsuits and legal threats against media and journalists with detrimental consequences for Greek democracy. My third example is Croatia, which is in an equally dire state. A further MFRR mission report states that, and I quote again, transparency in state advertising allocation to media outlets is a major concern, particularly at the local level. Many institutions fail to disclose this information, raising concerns about their influence and editorial independence. Recent calls by the far-right Homeland movement to end funding for Novosti, the newspaper serving Croatia's national minorities, have heightened concerns about political pressure and government rollbacks of media freedom. Additionally, the lack of independence of the public broadcaster HRT was a recurring issue raised by multiple stakeholders. These concerns are directly tied to the implementation of the EMFA. However, state institutions have not shared any concrete plan for its transposition with the regulation, I should say, given it's directly applicable. Finally, I can't not mention the extremely worrying situation in Slovakia as regards public service media. In Slovakia, the EMFA will have to be operationalised in a context where there is a very hostile environment against journalists. We would urge the Commission to continue investigations and post full application of the EMFA on August, or I should say after full application of the EMFA on August 5th, potentially consider taking infringement proceedings. So I know I'm slightly short of time, but what to do? I'm just going to give 2 examples of some recommendations. In the case of public service media reforms as a means of ensuring media independence, both editorial and functional, full implementation of Article 5 of the EMFA, for example, is recommended. These steps could include, and this is rather detailed, but I might as well say them, improve the independence of the appointment procedure to the governing bodies by reintroducing the requirement for a 2/3 parliamentary majority for new board members, strengthen objective criteria for selecting supervisory board members, increase transparency of the process, and provide a role for civil society to nominate experts for positions. The emphasis is always going to be on a role for civil society. I think we can agree, in slates of digital legislation in the last couple of years, the role of civil society has been marginal at best, and this is something we often talk about, and we'll probably not stop nagging. On media pluralism, and again citing the EMFA, an example of a recommendation to ensure the implementation of the media pluralism test when changes of ownership are foreseen in the media sector. Specifically, the government is required to designate a body to monitor media pluralism. When there is a change of ownership in the media sector, the Competition Authority is then required to consult a second body to provide an assessment of the impact of media pluralism and editorial independence. I'll go into more detail in the second round of questions on the media pluralism test and how we might see it as being best applied. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I asked if it was healthy. I think there were quite some medication needed here. It was a quite dire picture that you treated. I will give Wouter the time to reflect, so I will not start with you right now. But I will remain on news media and journalists and media freedom. And I'm looking at you, Dave, because I know this is dear to your heart. I remember when you once ACT prized actually the EMFA as an important step. You called it a new social contract between media and government, and I understand that these topics are high on the manifesto also of ACT that was recently published. So if you want to maybe highlight your most important takes on this.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you indeed for propping up our manifesto that we indeed just released last week, where we touch on these topics. That is not me. I don't know. Touch the mic. We're good. So thank you. Indeed, I mean, those are topics that are close to our heart, and we were from the beginning pretty big advocates of EMFA. Because obviously it's good that we see media in all its diversity and in all its angles, and I think we're happy to see a discussion that moved away from a very kind of micromanagement sector to wider issues, which are very important for our future, right? In Brussels, we tend to focus on the media cake and how we're going to split the media cake, etc. But there are many much bigger and wider issues, and I'm quite happy also to see that this new commission has really looked at this issue and will invest a lot of time in this issue, and particularly from the point of view of competitiveness, which is important for us. So looking at media independence from government interference, specifically going back to your boxes, Mark, we're of course very interested to see the application of Article 21, which for us is going to be fundamental, because it does establish crucial safeguards for dealing with anything that's overreaching, discriminatory, disproportionate measures that could undermine pluralism and independence. And I think specifically, to quote the EMFA, it addresses measures that may hinder or render less attractive the exercise of the freedom of establishment and the freedom to provide services in the media sector in the internal market. I think we could all agree that that is a good objective to have. I was a bit worried when I saw some groupings opposing this measure, trying to square off their piece of cake. What's important to us is to have a discussion about how do we protect commercial media in territories where they are the only point of reference for independent news, the only last bastion of actually treating information in a way that is not slanted or biased. And so for us, these measures will come at great and good timing in order to indeed tackle disproportionate measures, applications, gold plating, etc., of measures that we've seen incorporated in national measures to be biased against our members. And obviously, we'll look at how the Commission is able to look at that and target that and deal with it, because it's an important recourse to have. Another point, I can't touch all info points, but on media markets, I think it's a very timely and useful conversation to have. Media market discussions with regard to who is included in, and when we look at the scope of transactions and the fact that online platforms are in it, I think was extremely prescient. I mean, if we look at what's happening in the US with X basically becoming a political machine. Anya, sorry, but seeing Mark run to see Trump right after the election, I think there's cause to be worried about when these companies will eventually, if they haven't already, step into the media market zone. And we need to have that possibility indeed to have a treatment. And it's good that there's an eye-opening at EMFA level to say, okay, these concentrations, we need to look at the role of online platforms. That's extremely prescient and useful. With regard to media pluralism tests, we've had them in many territories. They don't exist in others. Well, they will be extended. We're fine with that. The only cautionary principle we put out there is, at the end of the day, the players that we represent need scale to grow. You can't continue to ask for commercial media to deliver on a whole host of things and not give them an objective with regard to market growth and being able to become relevant players. And that happens through scale. So obviously our cautionary tale there is to say, fine with media market assessments, but they need to be quick and done well. But they also need to give a view as to, of course, opening that whole new discussion, which is how do we allow our players in Europe to gain scale and to continue to be relevant and continue to play the very important role they play with regard to giving information, entertainment, and quality content to consumers all over Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I forgot to mention that you are the Director General of ACT, so the association representing commercial broadcasters and video on demand service in Europe, and with a quite wide footprint. So it's clear that when you mention the markets and how they have to be counted, it's a quite wide perspective. Wouter, I promised that I would let you chip in, and Wouter is here representing the Association of the Public Service Media, that was mentioned also by Mark, but many times, the EBU. You're the head of the Brussels office, and Article 5, we have heard, it's being mentioned. And there are certain adjectives that are quite interesting in this article with regards to the funding that should be ensured to public service media. They have to be adequate, sustainable, and predictable. I wonder if this is the case in all member states, maybe in some, maybe not yet. What is the priority for EBU with regards to the work that member states in the countries have to do now to do this famous alignment that Anna was mentioning?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share my thoughts on behalf of the EBU and its members. It goes without saying that this is an important milestone, Article 5 of EMFA. EMFA is very important for us as an industry, also as a media industry more general, audience measurements, takedowns of media and appropriate procedures to tackle that. The visual identity of media when it is consumed on media devices are very important. Obviously it all starts with independence, and for broadcasters also, or public broadcasters also, sustainable funding. The three adjectives are actually quite important for us, and we spent days and days analyzing them and making sense of it, because we all know they are principles, and principles need to be broken down in very concrete practices and requirements. And that will always be our fate to do so, because our ambition is not to create one model, obviously. Our ambition is to be proactive on behalf of our members, proactive to ensure that enough governments, or all governments, are abiding by the basic principles by August 25. That proactive approach can take the form of analysis, expertise, feeding into national consultations, but also being there on the spot. Our senior management is in those countries where laws are being discussed, where funding is being discussed. So expect more of that in the coming months, that the EBU will be present there to help assist members as much as possible. Gladly we're not doing that on our own, and I see some familiar faces also from journalist federations, and obviously also you, Magda, from the Observatory. That is really great in kind of providing some of the resources that will help facilitate the tasks, and a big shout out to the journalist federations to help us also identify at an early stage where problems are and team up together where it's possible. That will be more important in the future. So I leave it at that, but this is definitely a commitment to kind of look very closely to Article 5 and be back in touch in August, and hopefully a lot of national systems will tick that box with basic safeguards.
Thank you, Wouter. Indeed, it's a lot of work to do, so it's, member states are lucky to have an association also helping them in this task. Now I'm looking to the other side, and to you, Anja, because you've also been indirectly mentioned various times, especially by Anna, on the priorities. So how is it to be on the priorities of the Commission? That's a bit, we have heard about this interaction between the trusted, media service providers, content that is transported by very large online platforms. Meta has two of them that have been notified, Facebook and Instagram. So how will it now work for you with this regulatory puzzle that we have heard about? It's EMFA, AVMSD, but also DSA, which of course for you is very relevant. So how are you preparing for the August of next year?
Yeah, thank you so much. And perhaps I start actually with the DSA, because that's for us now the main framework from which we take the perspective as to how to address horizontal legislative acts that kind of supplement or further explain this framework, which is basically the guiding star now for all online platforms in terms of content moderation issues and all issues related to safety. And actually we just published our first DSA report, which is required by the DSA, so the audit report, where we basically identified where we kind of did well, what are the scope for improvement. We obviously did that with with experts in this field, and we feel quite confident that we are delivering on basically the goals of the DSA in this space. Obviously, this is the mitigating measure foreseen by the DSA, which now will be further analyzed and kind of discussed by the European Commission, who is also in this kind of dual role, also as a regulatory authority, and then obviously with esteemed members of ERGA and others that will kind of enter into this discussion. I mean, when it comes to issues related to content moderation, obviously for us, in terms of being a large platform and obviously having lots of people coming to express themselves on a variety of issues, this didn't start just with regulation. For a long while, we were having obviously our community standards, we have advertising standards, we have commerce policies, which broadly speaking define what we think is allowed and is not allowed on the platform. In terms of from the perspective of the platform, but also from the perspective obviously of the legislation, and also from the perspective, importantly, of the some national legislations that are also in place. So with that in mind, we have those processes where obviously we are taking down content based on those standards if it violates our community standards, if it violates our practices, or if it obviously violates the law. We also collaborate obviously in this space with law enforcement. They often send us requests for takedowns or requests for more information. This is part of the kind of process that we think is important when you're a large player like Meta, like obviously where people come on Facebook, Instagram to express themselves in various ways, and we obviously want to encourage a discussion that is legitimate and also in line with our policies. So in these terms, we obviously try to act with speed, and we try to kind of limit and restrict content that we think is violating, is potentially harmful, and obviously in some cases illegal. So we do it. There's removal. That's the most, let's say, restrictive approach. There is obviously disabling of access for certain users in terms of, especially if they are committing infringement for a number of times. And there is the motion of content, and we always provide the statement of reasons to affected party. There is a way to kind of voice your concern about this process, and we try to provide this all within the time frame that people feel is addressed very, very timely. So this is the DSA, and this is kind of our approach to this. Then obviously we have now EMFA, which is in the process of the compliance. So the compliance is, let's say, under preparation. We're very much looking forward to the guidelines, particularly on Article 18, because Article 18, from the perspective of us, Meta, is something that adds, let's say, a different kind of framework to what I just outlined, right? So our approach before is approach and encouragement from various regulatory authorities was to act quickly, particularly when content is harmful and potentially going to be viewed by a large number of users. So this was also another important element to it, to prevent harm, but to also prevent virality of certain types of content if they're violating, of course. So EMFA brings this different layer, because it says, okay, that's all great, you should continue doing that unless someone is the media service provider. And obviously there was lots of question about what does it entail in the practical terms when we operate as Meta on large scale. Basically the content that comes in every day, every hour, every minute, probably already now that we speak there is tons of new content. So we are basically now facing this kind of almost dual regime that we have the DSA, the kind of guiding star. You have to act swiftly, you have to act, of course, in notice, but also proactively. And then we have EMFA, the second kind of lex specialis almost, to say, okay, if someone self-declares themselves as a media service provider, you have to take a different approach. So obviously there is a lot of questions, and I think we're looking to the Commission for various clarifications and guidance, which I understand is coming, and we welcome this. During the legislative process, because right now we're obviously preparing for compliance and trying to make sure that our systems are in place and ready for this.
So there I'm curious, the declaration, the functionality for the declarations, is that something that you have to create now? It's not yet in place, right?
We are working
You're
on
working
this,
on it.
and obviously that also is some subject of our questions to the European Commission, and how this will look in practice, considering the scale also and the variety of players that we might be dealing with. I mean, I think it's no secret that during legislative process, because now when it's compliance, it's very simple, but during legislative process we have asked in the past to the European Commission, but also to European Parliament and Member States, about practicality of implementing this at scale that is meta. Right now, we are basically looking at this from the perspective that PSA is our, let's say, kind of framework that we are using at this point and kind of focusing on, and then comes EMFA with the special, we consider, exemption. And we hope that as any exemption, it will not be overbroad and will not take resources away from content that is, potentially shouldn't be on the platform, and will maybe not be applicable swiftly enough because the teams will be engaging to tackle the exemption. So that would be a couple of points on this, but obviously as a tool, as a goal of EMFA, the kind of focus on pluralism or journalistic freedoms, this is something that has always been and will be very, very important, and we're very much in agreement with the goals of this legislative tool, and kind of fully support here the European Commission goals to kind of elevate this issue in a separate kind of way outside of the BSA.
Well, thank you for that. We will see then how it works. I understand there are many questions, and I'm sure questions are also from the other side here of the stage. But I wanted now to see from Amazon. We have heard from Anya about Article 18. Anya is EU Policy Manager at Meta, and of course focusing on this article on media privilege. That is the most common name of this article. But there is another article that is dear to you. We have mentioned 5 for the public service broadcast. There's an article for everybody, and 20 is maybe one of the most important ones for you, I guess, with regard to the rights to the users to customize the media offerings. So basically, how are the contents going to be displayed on the device? How is the entry point to the content? So Inga Moser from Felix, she represents the voice of the VOD providers. She's head of public policy here at Amazon Prime Video, so you are also a global player. So how does this work? I mean, EMFA is, of course, one side of it is applied nationally, but for you as a European player, it might show out a little bit different. So what is your take?
Yes, thank you very much, Maya, and thanks for having me. And unfortunately, Mr. Hintertobler left, but I was also looking very much forward to having that conversation at the Bavarian representation, because probably what a lot of people in the audience do not know is that Prime Video has its historic roots in Bavaria, in Munich. So Prime Video is in the end the result of an acquisition of an online DVD business, a physical business that was then turned over time into an SVOD service, and we're in fact celebrating our 10th year anniversary this year. Saying this, I think it makes sense before I jump into Article 20 to at least have one explanation note about what Prime Video is about, because this will put a little bit more in context the points I will raise. So Prime Video is more than just an SVOD service. Prime Video is cooperating with commercial broadcasters, public service broadcasters, increasingly in the area of being a distributor. So that means we help broadcasters to find new audiences, and we also help them to monetize. So in addition to that, we obviously also have the historic part of the business, which is the transactional VOD business, where we also function as as a distributor of such content. And then recently we also introduced a live broadcasting stream for live sports events. And all of this has been regulated, or is under the supervision of the Bavarian Media Authority. We are regulated in Germany. Germany is our country of origin for Europe. And so we are applying German media law based on the country of origin principle. So now, coming back to Article 20. Article 20 is, I mean, to be honest, we very much welcome that the Commission and the EMFA strengthens the possibility for media service providers to offer more customized and tailored media services that are in the interest of users and also make them more relevant to their interests. So, meaning that, I mean, at the core of Amazon's mission is customer centricity, and it's always been. So, we are very comfortable and confident that we can be compliant with the obligations of Article 20. However, moving forward, and I think Mark pointed out correctly, the instruction manual. And Article 20 is still quite broad in the sense that, first of all, there are questions in relation to the AVMSD when it comes to the prominence obligation. So while the EMFA introduces, or EMFA's goal is to introduce harmonization, with the opening up of, and then, I mean, there's also obviously in relation to 7E and 7A, very much questions about harmonization per se, because generally speaking, when we talk about technical specificities in relation to the user interface, those are rules where it will be necessary to come up with a common understanding in Europe what prominence means on user interfaces. So saying that, we see that with 7A, a lot of member states, or a few have used the option in the AVMSD to introduce prominence obligations, but on a very individual, in a very individual way. So that means we're actually currently faced with a patchwork of regulation, and we would like to see that at least in the area of user interfaces, we would come more into a situation where we have harmonized rules, because if we have regulatory fragmentation, this means that there will be barriers for moving to other territories with the media service. And that's not only an issue for us, that's an issue for everyone. And therefore we believe that in this regard, when we talk about the technical aspects, this should be done in a coordinated manner with the Commission and the European Board, and we are really much looking forward to this. And I mean, this said, we have still time. I mean, Article 20 will not be immediately effective in August, so we will pretty much welcome further discussion about that.
Indeed, for this one there is a bit more time, and then we have also the fact that 7A of AVMSD on the prominence of general interest is not a mandatory article, so this of course has led to a different kind of speed. So before I ask Anna to maybe round up with a little takeaway, I wanted to see with you, Mark, where is academia in this? With plenty of questions, I think, more than answers, so which would you put on your investigation ladder?
Yeah, thanks for that, and it's perfect because it allows me also to answer the question that Anna brought up. With the parcel image and the little packages, indeed I wanted to show it is a big box of surprises in a way, but surprise was not the right word because we knew what was coming because we've been following the discussion, but it is many different elements put together. And I have been skeptical in the past, and for certain parts remain so, because it is a regulation that will depend. We've been talking a lot about implementation here, both on the guidelines level, but also what the member states live up to. So at the end of the day, the question will be, what difference does EMFA make? And here I do see an important role of the Commission, not so much in the day-to-day work, but what do we do if a member state consistently refuses to live by the letters of EMFA? EMFA makes things more concrete that we already, at least for some parts, knew before, because they were part of the European values, they were part of the fundamental rights framework, you can argue. Thinking, for example, about the position of public service media, one of the reasons why I didn't explicitly mention Article 5. Now we have it spelled out in words there, but at the end of the day, it means if a member state doesn't follow up with that, will the Commission be in a better position to confront that member state with non-compliance? And that's why I have been skeptical in the past, saying it's nearly like repeating what we all should know for some parts, but now it invites to take action if there is a situation where it doesn't work. So for me as an academic, it will be interesting to see whether EMFA can actually change a little bit the power situation in this setup. And I would be happy to, if that was the case, because as I said, the content, undebatable, is of huge importance, media pluralism and media freedom. And the last point I want to make on that is, I purposely didn't put it also on the slides, but I do have to put a bit of water into the wine. There is a certain risk that that parcel will be recalled and goes back to sender, because there is a legal action pending before the Court of Justice of the European Union, building on some issues that were criticized in the creation of it. For example, the question of the legal basis, the question of the regulation or directive. And the worst thing that could happen is if the European Court of Justice, the Court of Justice of the European Union to be more precise, evaluates this claim by one member state as being correct and withdraws or declares void parts of the EMFA. And that's where I, as an academic, will have my eye on and hope that, well, we'll have to see what the outcome of that is. But certain arguments were made which also had been put up as criticism in the declaration of EMFA.
We can certainly have another conference, that's for sure. But Anna, you've been listening a bit to the different priorities. Many of them matches the Commission's, I think. So some takeaways from this before we go over to the regulator's point of view.
Of course. So yes, yeah, I was hoping, Mark, that you would not say what you just said, but so obviously I will not comment on the ongoing legal challenge. We are approaching EMFA with the same spirit. I mean, its legal basis has been, I think, thoroughly discussed during the negotiations, and what we are now doing is simply preparing to apply the law as it stands, and are quite confident that we are doing it with the full legitimacy we have to do, and I think that most of the people here in this room would agree. And then coming now to what we do when we are preparing, I think what you have usefully kind of put on the table, it is indeed quite daunting. It's quite daunting, so it will not be easy. And where I do agree with Mark is that it will be, how should I put it, the credibility, if you want, of this piece of legislation will be in its implementation on the part of the member states, and the enforcement, by the Commission. We will not be alone in this task, because we will have strong partners with the European Board for Media Services, the independent media regulators. We will have the civil society with us, and also hopefully the industry with us. And I thank you, all of you, for being very positive about EMFA in your remarks. And it is certainly not an easy task, but a doable one, where I think also the member states have all the interest, and we have started, as I just said, a very positive conversation yesterday with the member states as to how they, indeed plan to adjust their legal frameworks to the requirements of EMFA. We will not hesitate, Mark, to do our job after August, So now we are in a very positive mood with the member states, very hopeful that they will do our common job, to put life into EMFA. But if we see by mid next year that things are not going so well in certain member states, we will certainly not hesitate to act. And then on all the kind of more market market or media sustainability issues that many other speakers touched upon, again, we have, I think, a good working plan to figure it out all together. You know, what has to be done for the media privilege, you know, to actually work in practice, and where maybe I would have, certainly look forward to a broad conversation with all the interested stakeholders when we will be coming up with our guidelines. But what I would certainly tell the concerned players, the very large online platforms, of which Anya here, you know, is the representative, is that yes, compliance is key. So you should not wait for our guidelines, you know, to think about how this functionality should work in practice. And at the same time, you should not see EMFA in isolation from the DSA, because as EMFA itself clarifies, whatever you will do to put life into this media privilege, or rather what you would not do, can feed into the enforcement of the DSA itself. So of the obligations that you have directly under the DSA to respect media pluralism and freedom, and the enforcement of the Commission vis-à-vis any very large online platform that has been designated. So I think it's important that there are some questions, Mark is right, but I think we have tried also to provide answers, you know, how these, maybe the pieces of the puzzle do not coincide 100% on all the issues, but I think on this one it is rather clear. On the issues that Inga was mentioning or concentrating, and they were also mentioned by Wouter, so customization, the prominence issues, so the importance, and I think it was also hinted at Greg in general. Of course, I think, you know, it is the next frontier of media regulation. How can we make sure, you know, that people get access to credible media content, you know, in this new environment, digital environment. And these are very important things, and we will only be able to give answers if we are very proactive, but involve also the very players that will have to put in place those issues, and also make life, you know, for them easier. Because if they have to comply, as Inga, I think, was trying to say, you know, with very different rules, well, sometimes you might miss the purpose, no, a little bit because for us customers, you know, of course, what matters is that I get access to my content, you know, that I value, that is important also from my cultural, social, you know, and kind of, you know, local perspective, no, but I have to, how should I put it, I don't see, how should I put it, I mean, it doesn't matter for me, you know, from where I do it, no? From where I do it and how it has to be done, I think can indeed be done better at European level, and with that probably we also go into issues that we will not entirely solve, and maybe where the pieces of the puzzle, you know, do not entirely coincide, and where we might need to provide some additional answers in the future. So with that, maybe it's a good also transition to
Absolutely, and I think the key will then be a multi-stakeholder dialogue, basically, where everyone will play a role, including the regulators. So I would now like to propose a swap of seats. Mark, thank you for now. And I would like to invite on stage Giacomo Lasorella, who is the president of the Italian Media Regulator Agicom, and also chair of ELGA, still ELGA, for some months still. And there should be a microphone. There we go. And you have been chairing ELGA for 2 years, actually. So, and this was also a time that coincided with the negotiations of EMFA. So, what does it represent to you? Was it something that took away your sleep at night, or did you enjoy this time as an exciting regulatory challenge?
Well, it was certainly, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for the Bayern, and thank you very much to all of you. It was really an interesting time, I must say. It's not pre-made phrase, because it was the occasion to think about the new challenges that face the audiovisual sector, and in the frame of this huge legislation going on. I must say that this was, in my experience, it was mainly a teamwork. It was a work of cooperation, first with European institutions. So I must thank very much the European Commission that had us as interlocutor, discussed with us a lot of issues. With the European Parliament, with which we are also very interested in interlocution. But it was also an occasion for discussing among ourselves and to see what issue were important for us and what issue we would have liked to focus in face of the European institutions. So I would like also to thank, among others, the French colleagues who ran the group that was responsible for the EMFA implementation, the German colleagues, the Spanish colleagues. We all worked together. It was a very good work. And I want to say that the result is quite interesting. I mean, EMFA has two main issues. One is to tackle to provide a harmonized regulatory framework, overcoming the fragmentation that is now faces us. And I very kindly disagree with the director in the dollar that the old nice work was fantastic for all of us. But in my experience as regulators, I saw that the problems are very much the same in each country, and we face very kindly, but we face interlocutors that are global and that are at least European. So it is very important to try to avoid this fragmentation and to really provide this level playing field. Particularly in this moment of geopolitical tension and external threats. So there are a lot of new tasks and competences, a lot of market concentration, of the dimension and prominence, customization of media offer. The task of the new board will be with the Commission to make some general rules, to make some guidelines, and to help this harmonization among countries.
And indeed, you said fragmentation, it's not only among rules, but also the difference between the regulators. Some have more experience, some have less, and there is this new digital clause in the EMFA that opens up for a new kind of role of regulators. In this structured dialogue, there will be a moment where you might have to deliver an opinion as European Board of Media Services. And how are you preparing for this with your colleagues within this new board?
Well, first of all, I'm very happy that the EMFA puts into law a system that was enacted within ERGA, that is this cooperation between regulators, this cooperation, because there is obviously the principle of the state country of origin, and this mechanism that was organized at first without any rules, just as a means of cooperation, and then finds finally application within rules of EMFA. So this already is a success of ERFA. Then there is the structured cooperation, which is a new challenge and which is absolutely crucial for the regulators, and in which we have to talk with operators as a single voice and as much as possible as a single voice. So this, I think one of the main challenges, among others, from the point of view of regulators, from the organizational point of view of regulators, is that it is not only a matter of the regulators among themselves, which is very useful, very proficient, very very effective, or with the Commission, but it is also, for the first time, it is the regulators that talk with the operators and with the protagonists of the market.
Yeah, indeed, and I would like now, can you guide us a bit behind the scenes, a bit of backstage? It's February 25.
Yes.
It's not a long time.
Not a long time.
So this will be a collective challenge for EU27.
Yes.
Are you learning from each other? Are you exchanging? How are you getting organized in this unusual transition phase? No?
Yes, it is a very complicated transition phase, but we're trying to deal with it. We've been preparing it since this year. Obviously, the main responsibility will be with the person who will take my place as the chair of the new European Audiovisual Observatory, which is the Spanish colleague Carlos Aguilar Paredes. But we are all collaborating. We have provided the rules of procedure. We have provided the structure, also on the base of the experience of the previous regulator. So we will try to take what was good of our previous experience and try to go further to see what's next and what are the new challenges, the new tasks that are before us.
Well then, I wish you lots of luck in these last months and the transition, and I thank you very much for having shared with us these insights from the regulator's point of view.
Thank you very much.
And now I would like to add another layer of information. I would like to call my colleague Gilles Fontaine on stage, head of the Department for Market Information at the European Audiovisual Observatory, in order to share with us some insights with regard to market data, and in particular, I'm curious about revenue flows. How is the cake? You mentioned the cake, no?
I love cake.
You love cakes. So what is your slice and how concentrated is our market? Gilles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maya. Simple question, but tricky to an extent. But I will try to share some data and see, maybe not give an answer, but maybe to see that how we formulate the question itself is important. So, first question, is the audiovisual sector growing in the European Union? And of course, the answer is, it depends on how you look at it. And basically, it depends on what do you call the audiovisual sector. Still, I have made some choices, and if I look at it in a quite encompassing way to the audiovisual sector, meaning traditional TV, on-demand services and VSPs, the answer is rather yes. For the last 6 years, we get a 4.5% average annual growth. That seems kind of healthy, but let's remember that's just slightly better than the inflation over the same time period. So if we exclude inflation, we are basically flat. But I think that, globally speaking, this figure is meaningless. So I would like to go deeper into the three main sources of revenues of the services in Europe: advertising, subscription, and the public funding of public service media. When we look at the subscription market, and we try to do a breakdown between linear pay television and subscription video on demand services, the picture is quite clear. Most of the growth comes from subscription VOD services, while linear pay TV is slightly better than flat. I would just like to do a remark, at least from my modest point of view of someone trying to collect data. I'm not sure that I will be able in 2 years to propose a set breakdown between linear pay TV and SVOD. I think that it's growing quite rapidly, and these two market segments may be only one. Let's go to advertising revenue. The picture is quite similar, maybe even slightly worse for traditional television, but basically linear television advertising is flat, even if we add up with the new broadcasters-based on-demand services. The sum of the two is basically flat, and the growth of the market comes basically, comes exactly from advertising on the DSP's platform. Small remark here too. Of course, the stagnation of traditional television advertising is mostly an issue for commercial broadcasters. It's also a smaller issue for PSBs, because PSBs do collect a small part, but still important for them, of the advertising market. So it's not only a commercial issue, it's mainly a commercial issue, but not only. And finally, the third market segment is not exactly a market segment, but the source of revenue is the public funding of PSNs. And here we are at an average growth of 2% per year. That's well below inflation. So to sum up this first question, all the growth comes from new services, the rest is flat. And secondly, the transformation to digital online world is pretty well advanced. It's about already 25% of the market in Europe. So it's not an emerging trend, it's new digital, it's 25%. Second tricky question, is the audiovisual market concentrated in Europe? And guess what? It depends on how you look at it. This time is more of what indicators do you use and to measure exactly what. And I'm just going to share some variation in the figures, illustrating that how you ask the question is the main question in mind. So we can start looking at, for instance, the subscription market. I'm using a very basic indicator. What is the share of the top 3 players? It could be the top 4, it could be the top 5, or the top 3 players. And I'm looking at country level, and I'm saying that at country level, if I look separately at the pay TV and SVOD market, the two segments are more or less similarly concentrated. But I can change the perspective, and I can try to see what happens if I consider the EU as only one market. And here the perspective is very different. The SVOD market is much more concentrated than the pay TV market for an arithmetical reason. It's just that the same players which are present in each country are the one on the SVOD market, where the pay TV players are mostly different between the countries. Those are the second variation. And then you can also consider pay TV and SVOD market, as I told you, together, as I told you before. I think that's where we are going. And here, of course, as the leaders in pay TV are not the same than the leaders in SVOD, again, arithmetically speaking, if you combine both, the market is less concentrated. So national view, market view, all the results depend on how you look at the market. And then I will not go to the same reasoning as regards the advertising market, but the results are basically the same. So to conclude, I would say having data is absolutely important, but how you look at it should absolutely be a part of the conversation, because that's an essential way to understand the market. And with this, up to you, Maya.
Thank you. And now, it depends on what the replies will be, and we will see how we will continue now with this second session where the time is a little bit tight, so I will have to remind everyone to be really telegraphic in the replies. This second session is, let's say, more AVMSD oriented, so it will be about fairness for market players, how is the situation, level playing field, it depends. I borrow your answer, I think it's a great one. And what about the protection of the viewers? So here again, I would like to start with you, Anna, because you might set a bit the tone. We know that 2026 is an important date for the AVMSD, but what's next?
Yes, thank you, Maya. So, by 2026, as you hinted already a few times, the Commission will basically have to present an evaluation of the current framework. No, this is the legal obligation and the directive. And it may, if it decides so, to accompany this evaluation also with possible proposals for AVMSD review. We are at the very, very beginning of this process. We will have to, of course, discuss the details with our new political masters, which is, by the way, also the case for the EMFA implementation. But there, I took more liberty because many of the things that I was saying were already announced, by the same political masters in the hearings. For the AVMSD, also, there were some hints, what will be important. Especially the Executive Vice President, she stressed, the need to have a close look at the current framework and see, if maybe it has some shortcomings. And it will not be a surprise to you that fairness and the level playing field and the competitiveness of Europe's media industry will be important, in this evaluation. And we will have to look at all these different trends in the market and see, whether, maybe what's happening in the market doesn't require a fresher look, at the framework. And apart from the issues that Gilles introduced, I think we will have to look at three things generally. And we are very much looking forward, by the way, to as always, to very fruitful collaboration with you on this. I think one maybe smaller issue still important, the growth of the creators' economy, so the influencers' economy, which has been quite exponential, will be one aspect. Then I think this increasing disintermediation, that we have been talking about so much, so in this new user interface, connected TV environment, I think will be another big trend to have another look, and we have started discussing these issues now in the context of prominence. And last, the big elephant, but not least, the big elephant in the room in general, how are the general trends in the digital advertising market, and how do the media, fare into this environment. And these were issues that we have only, partially addressed or tried, to start addressing in the current framework. But now, with all these developments, basically, as Gilles said, already there in the market, because when we were revising the directive before, they were just starting, but now the media market is there. And this, we will now, with all the stakeholders, start discussing the issues and organizing a broad stakeholder dialogue, and I'm very curious already to hear maybe some first input.
Start a dialogue now, and let's maybe start with the viewers, because they are also an important part of the conversation. I mean, the programs exist because the viewers want to watch them. So, Mark Dempsey, from your perspective, what is the situation in Europe also in terms of diversity? Anna mentioned some keywords, sustainability, that's players, they need to be able to survive, to exist. So how is, again, a little health check of Europe? What's your take?
It's going to be less a health check, I'm afraid. It's going to be more two challenges. It's also going to take us back to the EMFA because ultimately, as Article 19, we focus more on the EMFA than the AVMSD. So I hope that is still relevant to this part of the conversation. So ultimately, we see Article 22 of the EMFA as a vital element to ensuring the safeguard of media pluralism in the EU. And in the interest of keeping things brief, we've got two select challenges when it comes to Article 22. So paragraph 3 of Article 22 has been questioned by stakeholders as giving a disproportionate role to the European Commission. So for those not familiar with paragraph 3, the Commission assisted by the Board should issue guidelines on the elements referring to paragraph 2, points A, B and C. So A, B and C being the elements that need to be taken into account in the assessment of media market concentration. So just to note that since the factors at stake traditionally fall within the scope of the action and attention of national media authorities, it could be argued that since the board, since it is a forum in which national regulatory authorities can, amongst other things, exchange information, experiences and best practice and foster cooperation and coordination in the implementation of media laws and policies, they might in fact be best placed to lead this exercise, rather than relegated to the assistance role. Aside from its technical expertise, letting the board assume leadership might also be more effective in terms of consensus building amongst authorities. In any case, as discussed, the guidelines should serve to be a useful instrument for avoiding diverging approaches across borders. The second challenge relates to the scope of application of 22. It refers to market concentration. Paragraph 1 specifies the media pluralism test is to be applied to those market concentrations that could have a significant impact on media pluralism in editorial independence. As an organisation, we're glad to see the platforms are included as providing access to media content in the definition of Article 215, but wonder if the formulation goes far enough and might have included actors such as online intermediaries, influencers, and ad tech companies. The current media ecosystem, especially when it comes to its online dimension, includes a variety of companies that, even if they operate in markets that cannot be strictly defined as media, and even if they do not provide media services per se, can still have a substantial impact on media plurality, editorial independence and sustainability. Finally, and again I'm going to go briefly on this, the second point is on the importance of the role that so-called algorithmic pluralism can have. So in short, this refers to opening up the social networks and giving choice back to users. We have long since argued and advocated for both the DSA and then the EMFA provisions that would allow for user access to third-party recommender systems. Neither of these amendments were passed, as you all know. So I'm actually going to finish with something that's very current and topical, given the mass exodus from X to Blue Sky. And its CEO, Jay Graeber, when in a conference in the US, gave a very good overview of what they're trying to achieve with their solution. When asked about the design choices that make, and I quote, Blue Sky a fundamentally different social media experience, Graeber responded with, be prepared for a lengthy quote, but it is quite good. We built Blue Sky to build an experience that gives users more control, so it resonates with everything people have been talking about. We built it open source from the ground so anyone can use it, modify it, and our focuses are to give users a choice in their experience, to give developers the freedom to build, and to give creators a direct relationship with their audience. And the state of centralized social is that users are locked in the current status, and developers are locked out. And so in Blue Sky, when you first come in, we give the ability to have a following feed, a discovery feed, which is pretty familiar, and then there's a marketplace of algorithms. So there's not just one algorithm that controls what you see. People have built 50,000 algorithms. There's all sorts of things, from the cat feed to a little cozy corner where it's just your friends and just the people you don't hear from that often, or the catch-up feed, which is everything that happened and is most popular in the last 24 hours. And so you can create the Blue Sky, what you want within the Blue Sky. And this means that users have a lot better time, because depending on what you want out of social, you can use power tools underneath the hood and customize it to your experience.
Well, we'll see how it goes with this transition. It's indeed quite massive right now. But video sharing platforms, this leads me naturally to you, Anya. For a moment, many of us are there, locked in, let's say, in your social media, just to use the words of Mark. But jokes apart, level playing field. You have seen the figures that Gilles showed. What kind of effort do you think is needed in order to create a level playing field? Do you think there is a need for an action also on your side? How is it from your point of view? I guess you hear it very often. There is no level playing field and you are the ones that take the cake. But from your perspective, how does it look?
Thank you so much, and I just want to comment that nobody's looked in. Obviously, we all have, I think, around 40 applications on our devices, roughly speaking. So I do know that we're all using them as well per study. So fortunately, there is a lot of choice, also including in social media space. I mean, level playing field is an interesting concept. It's coming up in many different conversations. Broadly speaking, in digital space, where platforms are addressed, and there is some question. Okay, so what can we do? How can we bring the level playing field? And often the answer is like, well, so there is some regulation, so let's just extend the regulation to for example, platforms, to video sharing platforms, whichever the topic when it comes to level playing field. I noted that often kind of goes this direction, so I would hope this discussion doesn't go there, particularly that now we also have very clear recommendations from Draghi report towards regulatory frameworks, how we should approach this in terms of building competitiveness in Europe with the new kind of development in the space of AI in particular, but many other sectors in digital space. I think it's, I'm obviously coming from the perspective of the platform. I have no experience of working in, broadcasting industry or VOD industry, which is, I'm looking forward to hearing those perspectives. Our perspective is that we always were quite clear what is our, kind of monetization model, if you will. We are a platform where users come and exchange ideas, thoughts, sometimes share videos of their cuts, while we obviously build the advertising model around that. And now, obviously, as you might have seen, we also have a possibility to have a subscription model, which doesn't offer ads, and then we have some kind of, mix in between, which is, less personalized advertisement, but still advertisement is being served. So this is the model that kind of, our platform adopted as the kind of, way of working. This is also because how users experience content on our platform, be it audiovisual, but also broadly speaking content. There's quite a lot of different types of content our users are engaging, which I think is very different than what users on those other either platforms or broadcasting TV kind of engage in. And the way this works is just basically very different in terms of advertising, in terms of how do you surface ads, to whom and when is obviously completely different, just because the services, even though we're all somehow found ourselves in one AVMS, which is obviously a tool that we're here to discuss, but we are all still very different services, therefore there are very different rules and obligations in that sense that the Commission and the legislators, when they were working in AVMS, they recognized that those services inherently, while serve some form of audiovisual content, they are inherently different. So there is a category, obviously, for a video sharing platform, which has a different, let's say, obligation. But that brings me as well to the question of regulation. Obviously, we're a very heavily regulated industry now. There's plenty of regulatory initiatives directed at platforms that we discussed already, for example, EMFA. We discussed, obviously, the DSA. We haven't discussed the DMA, but that's another one that can be brought in. This is not the industry where we have no, let's say, regulation or kind of, regulatory scrutiny over, for example, how the advertising market functions and whether this is a healthy market. It's just we are in, let's say, in a different space. I mean, particularly Meta, the video sharing platform element, is not exactly in the same, let's say, audiovisual media space than some of the services we will hear from today. So I would just, I just want to put it out for reflection, and I know this might be not what everyone wanted to hear, but I just want to put it out for reflection that not necessarily creating the same rules for everyone just because we found ourselves in this puzzle that I think was presented earlier, very visual, where basically we are in the DSA, we're in EMFA, we're in AVMS, we are in all these three puzzles. We're all there in the same way. Obviously, we have many more obligations under DSA than any of other stakeholders sitting on the panel, and I think that's right. We're an online service provider with large amount of users, so therefore the rules for us are very different than for some of us, either in this panel or in the audience. But at the same time, we're also in a different space when we look at AVMS, when we look at other legislative tools in this space, and we also, all of us, kind of operate towards, obviously we all compete in a way for attention, but we all also address different needs of our users, of our viewers, of our, of potential newcomers. It's a very different format. So in this space, I mean, I see the numbers, and obviously it's a very compelling report, and we will be looking into it kind of deeper in the company. But I think there's just basically discussion about level playing field when it comes to like, okay, everyone is treated the same, even though there are different type of services with different type of offering, is perhaps not how we see digital space from our perspective.
So different creators, different rules, basically. It started a bit like this, also with VOD, then it went differently, but...
That would be the approach, I think, that would kind of factor in the differences and, create a regulatory scrutiny and yet allow each of the segments to flourish. And, yeah.
Very good. You mentioned there might not be full agreement, and I trust it will be so.
I see you right.
Yeah, no, I sense that too. And you mentioned the Draghi report, which is, of course, a very clear direction of less regulation, making things a little bit lighter, which is, I don't know, Wouter, what's your take? What's the European model? Is the European model something that we should cherish? What makes it so particular? And how do you see the level playing field from your perspective?
Yeah, well, the model is incredibly unique, and I regret that Draghi hasn't looked at more media-specific issues, because that would also
there was indeed a bit
equally big report. I think that's quite important to. But I mean, on the broad question, do we still need AVMSD or visual rules? Yes, surely we need them more than ever. It's not because they have a strong Media Freedom Act that we all need to kind of now believe in and support the robust enforcement on various levels, independence, but also the digital clocks, which are incredibly important. This is not to say that the Audiovisual Media Service Directive has lost value. On the contrary, there will remain an important emphasis from the EBU perspective on protecting minors, on protecting the integrity of media in its full capacity, on protecting the ability of media players based in Europe to invest in great original content. So these are important goals, and they will remain important. So I don't want to speak about reviews or not, but we have a tradition to more look at issues to be addressed, and I'm very glad that the issue of prominence, visibility has been floated. When you buy a connected TV, when you get into a car and you look for radio content, how easy and how many clicks is it leading you to access that content or find that content? I have a great sympathy with some of the Media Freedom Act solutions, like the ease of changing default settings. Sounds great. I have to meet the first person who is against it, but there are limits. Let's face it. Whoever bought connected devices, whoever bought smart TVs knows that the amount of people that are tech savvy and actually proactively change settings is minimal now and will remain minimal, unfortunately. Second of all, it kind of assumes that we all are tech savvy, and also we're all knowing perfectly well what to find. So you have a screen and you really want something else, you have to be able to find it. So easy default settings and changing them might be useful. But prominence and visibility is much more than that. It is about the freedom to stumble over content, the freedom not to miss content. And that's why I think we, from the outset as the EU and members, have really strongly advocated for a fully fledged approach on prominence, which on the one hand gives a clear incentive from Brussels to say this is an important issue, regulators across Europe look at it and start developing and test approaches. And we know, lessons learned from Germany, this takes time. And it should take time, but it's an important issue to look at. A last thing also on incentives on the one hand, and also a certain leeway for local regulators to assess what platforms are at a given moment important for media consumption, what are the major players. You need that active involvement of regulators, and many of which are in the room today. So that's quite important. And leeway also leads into the very exciting discussion that many of you touched upon, is also fantastic relationship with some of the horizontal tools like DSA e-commerce and policies, initiatives that drive media pluralism and diversity at national level. And that is also, I think, an important question we'll have to come back to. Not only to discuss in the context of problems, more generally to kind of have a robust, secure framework that suits us all, not in least public service media, but also the broader media industry. So I very much look forward not only to structured dialogue, but also any initiatives that could push that issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walter. That sounds encouraging and positive. And I wanted now to switch from public service media to commercial broadcasters, and I'm turning to you, Greg. Competitivity and sustainability, is that compatible with a strong regulatory framework? How do you see it? Is it more Draghi report, as Anne mentioned, or are you more on the side of Walter? Or in between?
First, I wasn't aware that the Draghi report was saying we should give more money to Meta, but it's a funny interpretation. No, look, I think for us, at the end of the day, like any business, framework or no framework, we look to predictability and stability. That's the core point of what we're trying to achieve here. And God knows that there's a lot of unpredictability out there. And it is a very unstable landscape for many different reasons. But also, namely, because we have advertising markets online that are way off of whack. You have two players basically gobbling half of the market, right? Same players that are explaining to us that we've got so many rules, it's very hard. Oh my God, I can't take it anymore. Come on. I mean, literally, there's a rebalancing exercise to be done. The reality, though, is predictability and stability first, right? When you have very unstable markets, you want to have a predictable and stable legal framework. Obviously, you're not going to create yourself two challenges at the same time. Now, of course, we're not blind. We can hear, voices calling for the opening following the review. And if there is going to be that, we'd say, first of all, study this correctly, because we had the same conversation 10 years ago about liberalization, right? There was a big conversation about liberalization. What happened? Minimal liberalization and more obligations. So that didn't at all tackle the issues at hand. So we'd like to see something that's very thorough, etc., and which really takes and looks at it in detail. Then if it is to be reopened, obviously there's going to be a lot of areas that are interesting, right? There's going to be areas around, qualitative rules. Do we want to make sure that, we have the same everywhere? Same for quantitative rules. How can we look at VSPs actually getting the same equivalent treatment? We also have rules around content. I mean, there's been some issues in some countries, right, where child protection is assimilated to LGBTQ content. Clarification there would be useful, right, so that we don't end up saying getting into these situations. So again, we're not calling for it, right? We don't want the AVMS reopened because I think nobody will be satisfied by it. And so we don't want that reopened. Neither do we want discussions in other institutions that are outside the EU on definitions and the rest, which clearly are out of whack with the reality of having a legal jeopardy between a system that would be done promoted by the Council of Europe and then a system promoted here in Europe. So we need to have good timing and thought and think this through well. With regard to obligations, I'd say generally that's just a no-go area. I mean, I've heard calls for more and more obligations, etc., to come in. I mean, clearly it's fascinating to read these because you have the impression that nothing's going on in the media sector. Things aren't changing. It's not a very difficult environment at the moment. So trying to add more of that in a system that is already starting to show its limits, I think is not going to be a good idea at all. So indeed, going back to our points, we want to see stability. It's not about the framework per se. Everybody's gotten used to the framework as it is, with all of its imperfections. But that has to be the first key. If it is going to reopen, then it's open bar. There's going to be a lot of talk, including on VSPs.
Very clear message. So, no call for reopening. What about you, Inga? Amazon Prime Video would, well, I guess it's not a call. This review will have, you will explain to us later the procedure maybe, but this date of 26 is there. But if you have a wish list, would you like to reopen it or not for the level playing field?
Well,
I don't think it's about a wish list to open the AVMSD. I think our wish list is to get legal uncertainties solved that are currently in the laws because of complexity of overlapping regulation, uncertainty, and so forth. But I think what struck me in the data was that we are a very data-centered company. I mean, it seems to me that the data is implying that there is some form of problem on EU level when it comes to the number of players in a specific market segment. So then I think the question I would raise is, why is that? What is the reason for that? Is that maybe that there are obligations that are actually preventing companies from growing also pan-EU or across more territories? Is it maybe because there needs to be simplification, cutting red tape? So, I mean, we are very much pro-competition, and we would always support to have more competition, obviously also on pan-EU level. And I think the key question is, how do I get there? And I think now the panel discussion runs a little bit about, do we need more legislation? And I would say, no, we don't need more legislation. We have a lot of legislation in place. A lot of that hasn't been implemented yet. So let's look at how we can work with what's on the table to actually achieve the goals that we have with the regulation. And then maybe one final remark on, because a lot of the discussion is centered around advertisement, and I mean, basically similar to a lot of players in the industry, we have followed the trend and introduced advertisement in prime video to be able to invest in compelling content in the long term as anyone else. So saying that, I mean, what we see is that there are still a lot of opportunities for everyone, and advertisement is clearly not compared to other incumbents in the online advertising market segment, our key revenue income stream. But I mean, saying this, we see that, I mean, also commercial broadcasters, I mean, they are always also looking more and more into the SWOT market segment. There is a lot of expectation around growth in that area, and also on their side they have a lot of opportunities to build those services on the brands and also the audience they have, you know, that come through maybe the linear part of the program. So, I mean, I guess my conclusion would be on that question that it's not a winner-takes-it-all situation. There is still opportunity to grow, but maybe we should look at what is preventing players from growth and then also competing on a pan-EU or even cross-border level.
Yeah, thank you. That was also very, very clear. Advertising has been mentioned many times, and Gilles, I'm looking at you now because you also mentioned the market and how do we define it. It depends, that's indeed. But if there was a little winner, no, in your graph with regard to the growth, is that the influencers? Who is there?
Yes, the influencer, it's an interesting phenomenon, and I already mentioned the creator economy. The basic concept of creator economy is a content creator going direct to consumer using a VSP. That's basically the definition. Why is it gaining steam? Because on the one hand, the cost has risen. It's a fiercely competitive market to be amongst the 1% which will make money on the video sharing platform. So we are far from the time where it was one person shooting at home and so on. Costs are clearly rising. And at the same time, what is interesting is that it's a complete change of business model compared to how the traditional production sector was working. It is completely different because in the traditional production sector, we had a pre-financing of most of the production costs by the TV channels, by the SVOD, the players. And this mostly does not exist in the content creator economy. And no surprise that we are talking among these creators economy a lot of influencers, because as there is no pre-financing from the VSPs, it means that the main source of pre-financings are brands and sponsors, because they are the only one available to invest upfront. And that's why, in my view, among the creator economy, the influencers are particularly to be watched as an interest. I'm not saying monitoring, but because here, by nature, there is a need of the money from the parents.
Yeah, no, that indeed it looks like a super interesting part of the market to follow, both from the market and the legal perspective, I must say. And now, before I call our executive director on stage to conclude this interesting discussion, just a clarification on the procedure, because is it, I'm looking at the text, no? It says there will be an ex-post valuation accompanied where appropriate by proposals. So there might also not be a proposal. How does it work? If you can explain it just very briefly, the procedure.
Yes, so I tried already. So, but what the Commission is bound to do is to do an evaluation of the current rules, and they might, but they do not have to. I mean, this evaluation might, but doesn't have to, be accompanied by proposals for a review of the legal act in question. So it is only, very beginning of a conversation that we will have to organize. It's true it's only end of 26, but of course we have to structure this discussion in order to make a meaningful evaluation. And just to reassure everybody on the panel, certainly no decisions have been made yet on the necessity or not of proposing, changes to the framework. But of course we have to do the evaluation seriously and look at the shortcomings, because some of the wishes that I heard in the panel are not necessarily compatible with, with basically no action. So it's it will be quite difficult for the Commission to do, an honest evaluation taking account of your input, because, well, not always, it will be easy to marry your wishes, with basically saying everything is perfect. So this will be a challenging exercise, will not be alone, and I think you have provided a perfect introduction to that dialogue that we are very keen to have with all of you, and in a very constructive atmosphere, and thank you for that.
Thank you very much.
Maybe one last thing just to say, because this was, a bit of a leitmotif in the panel while Susanna is coming on the panel. Whatever we will do is, we'll always be guided, but what you have seen a little bit in the announcements, for us it would be important indeed that we are providing the best framework for our media companies as well, to thrive in the market, and the competitiveness will certainly be our guiding star in conducting this evaluation.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all panelists. Now, Susanna, the floor is yours.
Okay, I will not keep you long, just give me 2 minutes. And I think this was very rich, and it deserves a tiny, possibly not too serious wrap-up. And I want to serve myself with this very nice introduction of the parcel. So what we have learned is the EMFA is not one parcel, it's actually several parcels. And then next to the EMFA parcel are other parcels. We touched upon the DSA, the AVMSD, but there are others that we did not really touch upon, but that many have by profession in mind. And maybe the others should also look into that more, and it will be an incredible task to make sure that the coexistence of all these parcels is understood also in what it really means for the industry, because that's what we're aiming at, to make clear what all of these rules do for the industry. Now, we discussed this package in some part already under the question, is it complete? Is it all in? Is it possibly already too much? Or, is it too complex? Was one of the latest things. Is it coherent? I mean, is the avalanche of packages coherent, I should say? Are the individual parts consistent? And is what has been sent around, we don't know exactly to whom all, is this powerful? Is it powerful in terms of enabling also to achieve the results, especially regarding enforcement, and then what is the very essence of every panel that demonstrate different views from different parts of the industry. Is it fair? I mean, that's the one question where I do not want to be in the shoes of the Commission, and that no one can possibly really solve. And then we have looked at some needs in terms of what really needs to be done, and there I think you gave, Stella Sorella gave the keyword cooperation. Lots of cooperation seems to be needed already to implement what has now been put in front of people, because in the end there is still a lot to be done about these nitty-gritty details. And there are a lot of actors also in the regulatory seat who have to come together to have also to put themselves, possibly same people but in a different room with other observers and slightly different goals. There's a lot of cooperation. And since we are talking about parcels, you know, at least my experience, parcels can get lost. They often even get to the wrong addressee. So also things to be thought about and to be done. And then I want to stress, not least because I'm here for the observatory, that the whole discussion and all this cooperation should include what Gilles did so strongly stress. It should include the discussion of the it depends on how you look at it. And Gilles, in your next life you will become a brilliant lawyer because you have understood it all. So that's very important, and that is also important if we want to really understand the uncertainties, the things where there comes subjective, because what the industry wants, and I think there's also a lot of harmony in this regard, is predictability and stability of your work. So address those odd things of where it depends in order to achieve this commonly, means also help us to help you in making things clear. There we can really be of help, that's why the observatory exists. And then I cannot do without quoting a phrase that I love, that came from Maya. Sorry that I highlight here something of my colleagues, now the second time. This nice sentence, there is an article for everybody. You are all involved, you can all stay on board, and also, that, Greg, my reference to you, you all need, I stress this, even if you don't know it, you need unbiased information. So, go home to your offices, download the report, read it, spread it, see that also on our website there is much, much more to be seen. And with this remains to thank our Bavarian hosts for this beautiful venue, the technical staff for their great help, and last but definitely not least, to all of you for having come, some of you from far. And contrary to the Commission, which is not entirely clear for whatever good reasons, whether or not there will be a few review of the directive, I think you state that very clearly, that this will be evaluated and it cannot happen. I'm quite sure that there will be a conference of the observatory again next year. See you.